Put something in your mouth, anything, a piece of cheese, a slice of tomato, a spoonful of broth, a bite of mushroom, a strip of aged meat. Now pay attention, not to whether it's salty, not to whether it's sweet, not to whether it's sour or bitter. Pay attention to the other thing, the thing underneath, the depth, the roundness, the quality that makes you want to close your eyes and stay with the food a moment longer. The thing your tongue is doing that doesn't have a name in your language, except it does have a name. It has had a name since 1908. The name is umami, and the reason you don't know it the way you know sweet and salty and sour and bitter is not because it was discovered recently. It's because the Western scientific establishment spent nearly a century refusing to admit it existed. Not because the evidence was weak, because the evidence came from the wrong country. Your tongue has been tasting umami your entire life. Every culture on Earth has been cooking with it for thousands of years. And for most of the 20th century, the official position of Western food science was that it wasn't real. The deeper I went into why, the more I found a story that had nothing to do with taste and everything to do with who gets to define what the human body can feel. Start with what the tongue actually does, because the tongue has been lying to you, or rather, you've been told a lie about the tongue. For over a century, every student in every biology class in the Western world was taught the tongue map. You've seen it, the diagram that divides the tongue into regions, sweet at the tip, salty on the sides, sour further back, bitter at the rear, 4 tastes, 4 zones, clean, simple, symmetrical, and completely wrong. The tongue map was based on a misinterpretation of a German thesis published in 1901 by a researcher named David Hennig. Hennig had measured tiny variations in sensitivity across different regions of the tongue and found that certain areas were marginally more sensitive to certain tastes. The variations were minute, barely significant. But when the Harvard psychologist Edwin Boring referenced Hennig's data in his 1942 textbook Sensation and Perception in the History of Experimental Psychology, he reproduced it in a way that exaggerated the differences into absolute zones. The tongue map was born, not from research, from a misreading of research, and it persisted in textbooks for over 60 years. The tongue map didn't just simplify taste, it standardized it. It said there were 4 primary tastes, and exactly 4. It said the tongue was divided into neat territories. It said the human experience of flavor was a solved problem, a closed system, a 4-channel receiver with nothing left to discover. And because it was in every textbook, in every classroom, in every diagram that every child saw when they first learned about the senses, it became fact. Not because it was true, because it was repeated. This raises a simple but critical question. What happens when a culture's official model of the body has no room for something the body actually does? In 1907, a Japanese chemist named Kikunai Ikeda sat down to a bowl of tofu in kombu dashi, a broth made from kelp. He had eaten this broth 1,000 times. His wife Tay made it with the same kelp, the same water, the same method. But on this evening, something about the flavor stopped him. Not the saltiness, not the sweetness, something else, a depth, a savoriness, a quality that he could taste clearly, distinctly, as unmistakably as he could taste sugar or vinegar. But that didn't fit into any of the 4 categories that Western science had declared were the only categories that existed. Ikeda was a professor of physical chemistry at Tokyo Imperial University. He had spent time in Germany studying under the Nobel laureate Wilhelm Ostwald. He understood Western chemistry, he understood Western taxonomy, and he understood that what he was tasting didn't belong in it. He spent the next year isolating the compound. He boiled down nearly 40 kilograms of kombu seaweed. He filtered, he extracted, he tasted the fractions one by one, and in 1908 he isolated brown crystals of glutamic acid, an amino acid, the building block of protein, the molecule responsible for the taste that didn't have a name in any European language. He called it umami. From the Japanese umai, meaning delicious, savory, the essence of the thing that makes food satisfying beyond any single flavor. Ikeda published his findings in 1909 in the Journal of the Tokyo Chemical Society. He had identified a new primary taste, a taste produced by a specific compound activating specific receptors on the tongue, a taste that was as distinct from sweet, sour, salty, and bitter as any of those were from each other. A fifth channel, a sense that the Western model had declared couldn't exist. The Western model did not adjust. As if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. For nearly a century after Ikeda's discovery, Western food science refused to recognize umami as a basic taste. The resistance wasn't passive, it was active, institutional, and systematic. Ikeda's paper was published in Japanese. It was not translated into English for decades. When it was referenced in Western literature, it was treated as a cultural curiosity, a Japanese interpretation of flavor, not a universal biological fact. The four-taste model held. Textbooks continued to print the tongue map. Researchers who suggested a fifth taste were met with skepticism bordering on hostility. The evidence suggests something much larger than a scientific disagreement. Because here's what the resistance actually looked like. In 1985, the first Umami International Symposium was held in Hawaii. Researchers from Japan, the United States, and Europe presented evidence that glutamate activated specific taste receptors, produced a distinct and reproducible sensory experience, and functioned independently of the four established tastes. The symposium formally proposed the term umami as a scientific descriptor. Western food science acknowledged the proposal, and then, for another 15 years, largely ignored it. It was not until 2000 that researchers at the University of Miami identified the specific glutamate receptor on the human tongue, a receptor called T1R1/T1R3 that responds to umami. Hard biological evidence, a receptor, a molecule, a mechanism. The kind of evidence that Western science demands before it believes something is real. And only then, 92 years after Ikeda's discovery, did the Western scientific establishment formally acknowledge that the human tongue has 5 basic tastes, not 4. 92 years. A Japanese scientist identified a basic taste in 1908. He isolated the compound, he described the receptor, he published the research. And the civilization that controlled the global scientific narrative took 92 years to admit he was right. The silence was deafening. Now here's where the thread connects to something darker, because the denial of umami didn't just affect scientific taxonomy. It shaped what people were allowed to eat and how they were allowed to feel about it. In 1968, a physician named Robert Homan Kwok published a letter in the New England Journal of Medicine describing symptoms he experienced after eating at Chinese restaurants. Numbness in the back of the neck, general weakness, heart palpitations. He speculated that monosodium glutamate, MSG, the commercial form of Ikeda's glutamate compound, might be responsible. The letter was brief, anecdotal, speculative. It described one man's experience at one meal. It launched a panic that lasted 50 years. Chinese restaurant syndrome, as the press immediately named it, became one of the most durable food scares in modern history. MSG was vilified. Chinese restaurants across the United States were forced to post signs reading "No MSG" to retain customers. The compound that Ikeda had identified as the molecular basis of the fifth taste became synonymous with poison, with headaches, with a vague, racially tinged suspicion of Asian cooking. Supermarkets labeled products MSG-free as a selling point. Health magazines warned against it. An entire cuisine was stigmatized because a single letter in a medical journal had connected a Japanese food additive with discomfort after eating Chinese food. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision, a compound identified by a Japanese scientist, used for centuries in Asian cooking, dismissed for 92 years by Western science, and then, when it entered the Western food supply, vilified through a racially coded panic that no controlled study ever validated. Because the studies were done, dozens of them, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, the gold standard of Western medical research, and they found nothing, no consistent link between MSG consumption and any adverse symptoms. The FDA classifies MSG as generally recognized as safe. The European Food Safety Authority has found no evidence of toxicity at normal dietary levels. The World Health Organization has reached the same conclusion. Chinese restaurant syndrome was not a medical finding. It was a cultural reaction. A civilization that had denied the existence of the taste for nearly a century suddenly encountered the concentrated form of it in restaurants associated with an unfamiliar culture and decided it was dangerous. I want to pause here and ask something that isn't usually asked. What does it do to a culture's relationship with food when one of the fundamental tastes is missing from the official model? Because umami isn't exotic, it isn't rare, it isn't confined to Asian cooking, it is everywhere. It is in Parmesan cheese, in tomatoes, in cured ham, in Worcestershire sauce, in anchovies, in miso, in aged beef, in mushrooms, in soy sauce, in the broth that every grandmother in every culture on earth has been simmering since before writing existed. Umami is the taste of protein. It is the taste that tells the body, this food contains the amino acids you need to survive. It is, by any biological measure, one of the most important sensory signals the tongue produces. And for a century, the culture that dominated global science told the world it didn't exist. The deeper I went, the more I found that the denial of umami follows the exact same pattern as every other denial I've studied. A non-Western culture identifies something real, documents it, names it, builds an entire knowledge system around it, and the Western establishment dismisses it for decades or centuries until its own instruments finally confirm what the other culture already knew. The Aztecs knew the tomato was food. Western botanists called it poison for 200 years. Indigenous communities knew the body could navigate by magnetic sense. Western science denied magnetoreception until 2019. Japanese chemistry identified a fifth taste in 1908. Western food science denied it until 2000. The evidence suggests something much larger than scientific caution. Because here's what the four-taste model protected. It protected simplicity. It protected a closed system. It protected the idea that the Western classification of the body was complete, that there was nothing left to discover about what a human tongue could do, that the model in the textbook was the final model. Adding a fifth taste meant admitting the model was wrong. And admitting the model was wrong meant admitting that a Japanese scientist had understood the human body better than a century of Western research. The official explanation collapses here. We're told the delay was scientific rigor, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, that the scientific method demands skepticism, and certainly skepticism is essential. But the skepticism applied to umami was not the skepticism applied to every new scientific claim. It was a selective skepticism directed at a finding from a Japanese scientist, published in a Japanese journal, describing a taste central to Japanese cuisine, at a time when Western food science regarded Japanese culinary tradition with the same condescension it applied to every non-Western knowledge system. Now consider what was available in that taste the whole time. Umami is the taste of glutamate, and glutamate is the most abundant neurotransmitter in the human brain. The same molecule that activates the T1R1/T1R3 receptor on the tongue is the molecule that mediates excitatory signals between neurons in the central nervous system. The taste of umami is, at the molecular level, the taste of neural communication itself. The body recognizes it because the body is made of it. Every muscle, every organ, every connective tissue in the human body contains glutamate. When you taste umami, you are tasting the building block of your own biology. Every ancient cuisine on Earth understood this without naming the molecule. The Japanese built dashi around kombu. The Romans built their cuisine around garum, a fermented fish sauce that was the most widely used condiment in the ancient Mediterranean, rich in glutamate. The Chinese developed soy sauce. The Koreans developed doenjang. The Italians aged Parmesan for years, concentrating glutamate crystals in the cheese until they crunch between your teeth. The French built the foundation of their haute cuisine on stock, on bouillon, on the slow extraction of glutamate from bone and cartilage, and aromatic vegetables simmered for hours. Auguste Escoffier, the father of modern French cuisine, was building his flavor systems around the same molecule that Ikeda isolated in 1908 at almost exactly the same time, on opposite sides of the world without contact. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Every cuisine, every continent, every culture that developed a fermented condiment, a slow-cooked stock, an aged cheese, a cured meat, all of them converging independently on the same molecule, the same taste. The taste that the Western model said didn't exist. I don't have a complete theory. I have a question that multiplies the deeper I look. Why did the Western scientific establishment take 92 years to acknowledge a basic human taste that every culture on Earth had been cooking with for millennia? Why did the four-taste model persist in textbooks for 60 years after it was shown to be based on a misreading of German research? Why was the molecular basis of umami, identified in 1908, not accepted until a specific receptor was found in 2000, when no such receptor had been required to establish the other four tastes? Why did a compound used safely for a century in Asia become the target of a racially coded food panic the moment it entered Western restaurants? And the question underneath all the others, the one that sits on your tongue right now, what else is your body tasting that the model says isn't there? I'll leave you with this. Tonight, or tomorrow, you will eat something. Something savory, something deep. Something that makes you pause, that makes you close your eyes for a moment, that makes you feel satisfied in a way that salt alone, or sweetness alone, or sourness, or bitterness alone cannot explain. That feeling is umami. It is the fifth taste. It has been on your tongue since the day you were born. It has been in your mother's breast milk, which is one of the richest natural sources of free glutamate on Earth. It was the first taste your body ever recognized. And for 92 years, the scientific establishment that claimed authority over your body told you it wasn't real. Not because it wasn't there, because the man who found it was Japanese, because the cuisine that centered it was Asian, because the model was closed, the textbook was printed, and the tongue map was on the wall. Your tongue always knew. Your tongue has 5 tastes. It has always had 5 tastes. Every recipe your grandmother made, every broth she simmered, every cheese she aged, every sauce she reduced, she was cooking with the taste that the textbook said didn't exist. The textbook was wrong. Your tongue was right.